we've been farming for so long, we've degraded so much that where we're coming from in terms of where we have to get to be what I consider ongoing sustainable farmers in terms of our soils and even what we're doing to our waterways and our woodlands and our wildlife and all of those things, we're coming from a quite different place.
Welcome back to another episode of the Force of Nature podcast. Today's special guest is Dan Smith from the Wye Valley in the United Kingdom. I met Dan on his recent trip through New Zealand as part of his Nuffield Scholarship, and we hit it off straight away. In today's episode, we discuss Dan's Nuffield Scholarship, his trip around the world, what he's been seeing in New Zealand, and what takeaways he is going to take with him back as part of his Nuffield Scholarship. We'll also discuss his consultancy and his farming business back home in the UK. So without further ado, let's get into it. Dan, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you, man. I'm doing well.
It's a real pleasure to have you on the podcast. It was great having you stay and hear about your trip. Must be nice to be home now.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to be back. It's different. I've described myself as coming back poorer but richer.
I can only imagine.
So wear that one out. Yeah.
Yeah. So for those listeners that aren't familiar with who you are, Dan, can you give us a bit of a background?
Sure. Yeah. So I farm here in the UK in a partnership with my wife. We've got a farm business called Roots In, which is also my consultancy business as well. And that really looks at water health, soil health, grazing. But at the heart of it is the kind of is the people and communities. And that's kind of, we're using the farm. We're very new to this farm here. We're using that to kind of build a community as a kind of an example of what's achievable, I guess, in this space. And that is the foundations of the consultancy. Some quite cool stuff about that, which I'm happy to go into. Previously to this, for the last 10 years, I've run a charity farm where we invite disadvantaged children to come to farms for therapy. So coming from a very conventional farming background, it was a bit of a baptism of fire to me to kind of enter that space, combining therapy and lots of different demographics and lots of different mindsets with kind of really good-hearted, sustainable farming, I guess would be the best description.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm at now.
So we was discussing you've gone from about 7 farms down to 1. What was the big catalyst behind making such a big move? Yeah,
so the charity ran over 7 farms and was quite a big operation. We had my consultancy business has started to develop more, so more and more time pressure on that and lots of exciting opportunities, lots of personal development stuff, such as Nuffield, which again we'll go into in a minute. But also there was a consideration more around our kind of values and beliefs as people in the world, I guess, but also as new parents, and kind of where we wanted to see our next chapter go for the next 15 years, and actually how we wanted to put our learnings broader, I guess, from a lot of the things we've experienced, how we could kind of affect change through that, and also what we wanted to create more for us and kind of the community around us, what we felt like we could achieve. So it was a kind of a shift in mindset, but also, I love the charity work. I love the stuff with the kids and all that sort of stuff, but it was kind of moving on to how to develop what we do next, which is why we've taken the dive and taken a farm for ourselves.
That's awesome. It's quite a powerful change in what you were doing. What's the path forward that you're going to go with this current farm?
Yeah, really good question. So what we're really trying to do is use it, as I said, as sort of a foundation for the consultancy, but we've done a lot of, historically we've done a lot of the grazing and a lot of the kind of ecological approach and all of those things, and worked with a lot of big organizations, and we can do that stuff, and we can prove that we can do it with the data, and we're still pushing boundaries on that, certainly in our arable operation here. But actually at the heart of it, what we're really passionate about is access for others to do that. And I come from quite a foundation of belief that to really show change in the industry, we need to change how we allow people into it. So what we're using this as is specifically giving opportunity to others to have access to land, have access to space with a degree of mentorship and support, so that they can kind of go on and flourish and maybe one day go onto their own farm, or certainly supporting really good businesses to grow. So we have a veg grower, a market garden enterprise happening. We've got someone growing cut flowers for the wedding industry. We've got someone growing agroforestry trees. We have somebody looking at seed harvesting, a plant nursery. We have somebody craft. They're a wood turner, and they're using one of our old buildings for sort of rural crafts. So, and an arable operation, and we're also looking at whether we can support somebody in a cattle operation. It's quite a lot going on in quite a small space, and that comes really from some of these ideas around mental health in farming as well. Historically farms were a community-based place, and now are quite a solitary place. So there's a bit of that plays in. And also this idea of knowledge sharing. So we have an event space here, a beautiful old barn that I know we laughed about because it's older than farming in New Zealand, which I still can't quite get my head around. But yeah, kind of a beautiful space that people can come and do sort of knowledge exchange with people on the farm, but also use it as a space. And we do lots of farm walks, lots of engagement with different groups, not necessarily just farmers, to kind of get them on farm and get to see them, so we can talk about things like what's going on underground versus just sort of what you can see, and maybe some of the answers that lie there. Yeah, so quite a lot going on, but that's our passion, I guess. And that's, we often talk about legacy and like what do you want to do, what do you want to achieve, and that slightly encompasses where we intend to be heading, I guess.
Yeah, it's a fascinating model, and anyone would think that you must have quite a lot of land to be doing that on. What size area is the farm?
Yeah, so we're the core of it is 200 acres. We farm all sorts of other bits around the place when the opportunity's there. It's quite interesting that I would say we're in quite a conventional area with some really, really good farmers, but I think because we do offer something slightly different, these opportunities do present themselves. It's quite good access to land. This kind of the story behind it, and we're not too far from where we used to farm, so we're still kind of known within the community of some. So that's quite cool. But actually, it comes from I really believe that 200 acres you should be able to support a family on. And actually you should be able to support other businesses on. And a lot of my consultancy is going on to other farms that people have bought and kind of have the dream, but don't necessarily know how to put it into place. And actually the stuff that I'm really enjoying is trying to help others to kind of achieve slightly what we're doing, but within their own context. And that's really fun. And there's definitely a growing need for that. So the day-to-day practicalities of doing it here in terms of even, insurance and contracts and payments and all of these things, the proof is if they're scalable. And, when we're putting value on food security and people being able to, a lot of families who are buying these farms are really motivated by just being able to eat from their own land, like good, clean, healthy food. So actually it's quite a quick win to put some really young, keen person in there who's got the skills to make that happen. And, to some degree, it is to do with finance. Things have to be profitable to be sustainable. But then it also comes up to the questions of, value beyond financial. And there's also quite a lot of that involved, which is quite fun.
Yeah, it's a certainly interesting space to be working in, and cool that you're doing it on your own plot first. How did you end up getting into the consulting game as a farmer? Did it just fall in your lap, or was it something you always wanted to pursue?
No, not really. And actually, I guess the answer to that is a lot of this stuff I kind of just have fallen into by, I guess, being passionate. I think I certainly, and actually I discovered this I didn't discover it in New Zealand, but it cemented it in New Zealand. I'm at my kind of optimum when I'm in a really good environment, a really kind of good, healthy farm environment, surrounded by like good farming minds, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably when I become passionate and when I become kind of engaged. And I think that, so actually my consultancy quite often just results from people seeing that and then being like, how do we make that happen with us? Or yeah, a lot of the jobs just kind of come through that word of mouth. We don't advertise. You wouldn't even find us if you Googled us, I don't think, in that respect. But yeah, it just kind of rumbles on, and I get excited when somebody approaches with a fun project. I'm like, yeah, I can help with that because it feels like a good thing to do. And it's cool now. We can definitely afford to be a bit choosy with some of our work, and not that we don't want to help everyone, but it just, some things suit much more than others, suit our skill set. And actually what's really cool is that now, because of sort of networks and growth, we now have access to really good specialists in certain things. And it's much more of that kind of community vibe, and actually something that I would say I'm not remotely qualified to do, if there is a qualification in it. But that seems to be less, I guess to some degree, that seems to be less important now. And a lot of the stuff that I've sort of grown into is really based around mindset more than technicality. And I guess that's the thing that I can do. And I have to say, the charity work that I did, if you ever want a kind of a crash course in emotional intelligence and how to deal with difficult conversations and provide support, teenagers who have had a lot of early years trauma, is probably the way to do that. That was a real baptism of fire for me, and a real kind of big learning and I think a lot of those skills are now transferable to just dealing with people generally.
Yeah, so I guess that probably leads into your work that you're doing at Jamie's farm. Do you want to speak about how that really encompassed that work within running a fully working farm at the same time?
Yeah, actually, it's a really good observation, that kind of fully working farm, because that's exactly what it needed to be, and that's exactly what I believe a lot of these projects, certainly a lot of these social and community projects, lack sometimes. And we're doing it here in that you have to have a sense of purpose. And actually, I had a really good chat with I don't know whether to name names, but a guy in New Zealand about this. Having a sense of purpose is kind of key to direction. And by having, in the kind of therapeutic setting, or even the kind of when you're encouraging next generation in, or people with different mindsets, maybe through diversity or historic experience, like having a really strong sense of purpose and a direction is kind of what can change people. And a lot, certainly with the teenagers we were working with, a lot of the time they were kind of floating around, getting in trouble, not really understanding what their direction was because they didn't have that sense of purpose. And actually, even a week on a farm where you have to go and do jobs because, well, we're farmers, you have to. There isn't an option. You have to go and do those jobs, and there's a kind of a beginning and a middle and an end to that job. For example, moving sheep or getting bales in, or whatever, growing your own food, cooking your own food, which are all things that happen on a kind of working family farm. They all have a sense of purpose to them, and in a world where, I don't know whether I can swear on here, but kind of in a world where, let's call them nonsense jobs, there are quite a few of them, or kind of nonsense pastimes that we do, like scrolling through our phones, for example. It's not giving us some of those basic needs. And I really believe that actually agriculture is a great, there are others, but agriculture is a really good vehicle for some of that stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. And even within agriculture, you don't have to be specifically the farmer. You can be a contractor or some other role that is part of food production. And
sure.
I think people don't realise that there is so many pathways within agriculture. Even in a local context here in New Zealand, it's not being pushed as like, this is such a great pathway and a great lifestyle and a great purpose to your life, as you say.
Even that, I'm not a tech geek, but I absolutely love like mapping and that sort of stuff. And it's so crucial to a lot of what we do on farm and kind of data analysis. And I'm like, imagine if you can capture a whole load of these people that don't know that mapping even exists, or kind of and it's such a. There are loads of those bits that are really vital to food production, in my opinion. So it's kind of, that's also what I'm looking at is those kind of, like, I call them subsidiaries to the core, but they're vital.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many vital support roles, and I guess once you figure out what your purpose is, it becomes that North Star. And if you can play a role in how food is produced, it's kind of, I would like to think of it as like a noble act or a noble way to spend your life.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. I would caveat that to say I think it's sometimes, and I'm guilty of this, getting kind of lost in what to do for the best in some of that, though, because it is so broad, and kind of where to put your time and where to put your energy. And I know I've asked this question of a few people, but, like, what is a farmer? And some people are really, like, defined about it, and this is the absolute definition, and others are absolutely not defined about it. It's more about outcome than it is doing. And, there's quite a lot of confusion even within that, which is why I believe, even if we talk about sense of purpose, even within that identity, you have to kind of find your groove a little bit. And I'm still working on that for sure.
Yeah, I would say I am too, figuring out just trying to do the things I like doing rather than doing everything. But, anything in life, you have to do things that you don't like. And being a farmer, I think, is one of the most complex roles in life, because you do have to cover so many areas. Whereas I think some jobs you can just kind of be pigeonholed unless you are the business owner.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's very fair. Very fair.
So you're a Nuffield Scholar, which is a great honour to be. What made you decide to apply for doing the scholarship? And
yeah, excellent question. So essentially, with the work that I was doing with the teenagers, what we were trying to do was sort of capture their best bits and then celebrate those best bits. So when they left the farm, they felt, we described it as being 3 inches taller than when they arrived. And after a few years, and I did that with a lot of integrity and a lot of care, and I was very passionate about it, and that takes a lot of energy. And I think probably after 5 or 6 years of doing that, I kind of had this realization that I was being a little bit hypocritical in that I was sending these, and I was telling these kids that they could do anything that they wanted if they applied themselves, and there's all of this world of opportunity out there. All you've got to do is kind of grasp it and do it, and the future's bright. And I think I had the realization that I wasn't doing that for myself. And then having kids, and I absolutely believe in the power of role modeling, and kind of that actually people can only do what they can see. And I wanted to show my kids that actually we're trying to push boundaries, we're trying to get further ahead, we're trying to learn, not in the kind of typical sense of the word. So then I went down. So there's this hypocritical me. So I essentially just applied for every single opportunity that I thought was applicable. And I had an amazing 2 years of like really intense learning. And I think the background for that you should probably aware of is the fact that I didn't, I didn't do very well at school. I hated school, and I actually sort of dropped out before I had anything remotely worth talking of. So I kind of definitely hadn't done the university thing. So I guess I hadn't done a lot of that learning. I'd just gone straight into work. So yeah, I took on anything, and I went on a couple of different courses, quite sort of intense 2-week courses. And actually what I learned there was the kind of the power of the network. And actually all of a sudden I had this world of like really cool, capable people doing all sorts of different things, some of them quite senior in the industry, some of them changing industries, but of like a core, really cool people that I could run a lot of my nonsense past to see whether it was feasible or sensible or any of these things. And I guess to some degree, Nuffield was the kind of ultimate for that. And actually I applied for it absolutely not thinking that I would get it. And I put effort into it for sure, but always in the back of my mind that I probably wasn't capable of doing it. So yeah, imagine my surprise when I received it, and all of a sudden I wasn't that hypocrite to some degree. I was absolutely now an imposter, but I wasn't a hypocrite. So that kind of, that goal place changed slightly. And then I guess yeah, I think when you receive something like that, you have the responsibility to do it really well. So that's essentially what I've decided. I'm now 18 months into it and kind of coming towards the end of the actual kind of delivery aspect. But actually, what I've subsequently learned that it's a kind of, because it is a network, it essentially it lasts forever if you're prepared to engage with it. So that's kind of also how we choose to go on with that. And yeah, it's been a pretty epic experience, I have to say. It's been really testing, probably some of the hardest kind of times, the realization of leaving the previous role and being offered a farm and really nailing our business, also like taking on a role 3 days a week as well at a kind of farmer support for environmental works. Like there's quite a lot of stuff that's happened. And actually, amusingly, I put a post on LinkedIn or something the other day saying, "Oh, this was 2 years ago," and somebody commented saying it was actually only a year ago. There's a lot happened in a really short amount of time, and a lot of that is because, Nuffield, I think it tests your mindset. I think, in fact, somebody described it to me today as heightening your bullshit meter, I think is what they said. And being careful not to become like cynical.
Yeah.
Is fair, because I think that was probably the conversation I was going down.
Yeah.
It just gets you thinking. It take traveling, month in Brazil, month in Canada, month in New Zealand, and that really intense, meeting a lot of people. And then these times for, I don't know, what was it, 14 hours on a plane where you're in your own space on your own. It's quite it's quite an intense experience.
Yeah, I've been very jealous of your trip so far, but I can imagine you've talked to so many, like a breadth and width of people across all those places. So you kind of have to have a bullshit meter, or you develop one because you can start picking up where what they're saying isn't aligning or is actually outside of the scope of what everyone else is saying.
Yeah, and it's also, context, something that's bullshit that I find bullshit, someone else might find entirely feasible. And I think that's the point of it. That's why different kind of personalities work. And my subject, I think, is pretty loose. It's not particularly technical, so I've kind of quite free to travel where I want. And I've deliberately put myself in scenarios where I know that I'm not necessarily going to agree with the narrative. And that's cool, and I've definitely learnt to do that. And I think it's really, really important.
Yeah, 100%. I think if you don't expose yourself to opinions that are outside of your own, you just get stuck in almost like this cavern of just people repeating the same things, and you don't grow, and you could be well and truly wrong with what you're learning or putting out into the world. So what is your topic then? Do you try and explain it to the listeners?
Yeah. So the title is Generation Regeneration, and it comes from when I first penned it. Basically, I thought that sounds really cool. I have subsequently seen that Nestle are using it for something in their marketing. I doubt very much they got it from me, but I'm claiming that they might have done. When I applied for it, I was still doing the charity work and this kind of passion for the younger generations. And we were working with lots of different ethnic minority groups, and we had a lot of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children come through the farm. And what I was seeing was like these loads of young people who would make epic farmers, or certainly be really good within the agricultural industry, but there wasn't really a way of kind of capturing them. And because my passion is regenerative farming, for want of a better term nowadays, I kind of just combined those two and came up with a Nuffield. It's evolved a bit since then, I think, as a lot of Nuffields do, because you're going out and discovering all these things. And, for my context, I hadn't travelled outside of Europe. I hadn't got on a plane until I was 14, and I hadn't travelled outside of Europe until I went to Brazil to start my Nuffield, which is a pretty, if you're going to have your eyes opened, like that's the way to do it turns out. So it's evolved a bit, and because of a lot of people I've met and a lot of the kind of ideas that I've talked about, and it's probably based at the kind of university that's where I kind of university, college leaver age, not necessarily that they've gone through that process, but that's now where I kind of feel if we're going to create change and the change that we need to see in the industry, or maybe I keep on coming back, is it a really selfish thing? I really believe that to change a lot of the mindset that I feel like needs to be changed, then the way to do that is through more diversity in the industry, and I would say it to anyone. I've experienced sexism, racism, ageism, all of the isms in my travels in ag. Now, I have a particular disdain for that and a radar for it because of the history of the people that I've worked with who have gone through a lot of that stuff. And so I have to sense check, is it my kind of passion to see a lot of that stuff change that drives some of my decisions? Or actually, do we really need to be encouraging a lot of different people into the industry to drive change? Because we do have a lot of really capable people from within and like next gen from within, but it's the mindset bit and finding the solutions to the problems that I think that we have as a sector and moving them forward versus this kind of thing of, oh, we're just going to do that because that's what dad always did or whatever. That's kind of where I'm at with it, which is probably not a very clear explanation of what it is. And I've got to write a report on it. I've got to do a video and then I've got to do a presentation. So I'm working on it, but yeah, the best way to describe it is I thanks to Nuffield, I absolutely have more questions than I do answers.
I would say that's probably a good project if you're coming out with more questions. And I do love the diversity piece because it is something that is probably lacking in the industry no matter where you go. And there's plenty of people who actually want in and that want a chance to go farming, but may not because of the diversity aspect.
My thing is action versus words generally. That's like which is why that's what we're trying to do here. And actually prove that in principle, one of the people that we've got doing the gardening, hopefully, fingers crossed, is they're also like a human rights campaigner. So there is these kind of things that we're deliberately trying to weave in because they're really cool, I think. And actually they have the ability to kind of really question some of those unconscious bias. And I think that's really important. I'm not saying it's the answer, but I think it's really important. And the reason I come to that is because I feel incredibly privileged to not only have I met the people that I've met around the world who have really challenged me and shown me different ways of doing things, but also lots and lots of those young people that I've previously worked with have just asked me questions that I'm like, yeah, you're right. Like you should ask why. Like, why do you move those cows like that when you could do it like this? Or like, and I think a bit like what you were saying before, I think the ag industry is its own kind of echo chamber. And, New Zealand is slightly different to the UK and that the way UK is slightly different to Brazil. But we all have our own echo chambers within that, which is important because that is the culture in agriculture. It's just that I'm not always sure it's as positive as it's portrayed to be from within.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. And like the culture is a really key underpinning of agriculture, but that diversity of thought and ideas is where I think the industry can expand and develop going forward. Like if we keep staying in an echo chamber, we're actually restricting our innovation ability as an industry. Like it's what you say, it's like, why do we do certain things? It can just be a simple question like that from, a 15-year-old, and you'd be like, oh, I don't actually know why I do that.
Sure, yeah.
And they can come up with a different way or something that solves the issue or a better way of doing it.
I think you've just made my Nuffield report. There you go. I'm looking for the answers.
Yeah. Or maybe there isn't an answer and that is the answer.
Yeah, and actually I've, a lot of Nuffield is incredibly technical and I really respect that and I think that that's needed. I'm not particularly technical. There's this thing of like, what do you remember when you have a conversation? I will always remember the feeling of the conversation versus the detail of the conversation, for sure. I know that about myself. But I also believe that that stories are the thing that create change. Very rarely do you actually create deep-seated kind of change with technical data. You might convince somebody that something's right or something's wrong like that, or kind of prove a theory. But actually, historically, it's stories that have kind of started to get people thinking and allowed people to make decisions on their own. So I think I'm quite happy to pitch it at that. It's just that I don't fully have the clarity on the best way to do that, or actually to some degree, like fully that I believe all of the concepts that are kind of whirring around in my head.
Yeah, I'm sure that clarity will come over the time as you start writing and doing revisions.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so.
Do you have any kind of favourite stories from your trips overseas, whether it be Canada or Brazil or New Zealand?
Oh, yeah. So what I've deliberately tried to do, and this is just because Nuffield, you do it how you want to do it, essentially, a bit of guidance. What I've done is tried to stay with farmers, or tried to stay with people within the industry. A lot of people might go and stay in hotels or et cetera, et cetera. So I've been incredibly lucky. And, like things that you'd never expect. I ended up in Canada on a farm on a Sunday. They weren't working, but the hay needed making. So I was like, well, it's not against my rules to go and work on the Sunday. So I started and I mowed the hay, and then I'd stayed there 4 days, and then I'd basically finished making it and stacked it in the barn by the time I left. And that's pretty cool, like making hay on the other side of the world. And the opportunities that in the Pantanal in Brazil with a farmer who had his sheep killed by a jaguar and kind of going out with the spotlight looking for these big cats, and things like that are just they're pretty mega experiences, and they're only sort of made to happen by the fact that you get to spend quality time with these people, and you get to have really good yarns with them, and kind of get to know them. And the privilege of there's a guy in New Zealand, I don't think it's a spoiler, that I stayed with that literally just had a baby.
Yeah,
they've stayed with us in the UK, and like I would consider them really good friends, despite the fact that they live on the other side of the world. And the fact that I was staying in their house less than a week before they had a baby, it's a pretty big privilege to get the kind of insight into these lives and stuff. So I think that's the highlight for me, absolutely. Those kind of people interactions, and like the day we had with you and Sam, I kind of people that I would consider friends, even though that we've only met for quite a short amount of time, because we share similar ideas or similar kind of mindset. And for a guy who never left the farm, to me that's pretty mega, pretty cool.
Yeah it's pretty cool. And I guess that's where that culture of agriculture underpins a lot of it, because we are similar in a lot of the ways.
Really good point. Really good point, actually, that culture holds that together. And I do wonder, I think it probably is achievable without Nuffield, but Nuffield absolutely helps it. I kind of describe it, well, it's twofold. I describe people coming into Nuffield. They have to do it well, and the only reason we can do what we can do is because of the people who did it well before us. And the reason for that is because it kind of, I think, because people know the name and they assume that someone's done due diligence on you, that you're not a complete idiot. That these doors are slightly open. And so it just makes that much easier. And from my experience, everybody has been really welcoming, really engaged, very open to share a lot of personal stuff and a lot of business stuff. And I say that's quite an honor to receive, I guess. And the flip side of that is we love hosting people. We're now in a position that we've got a big enough house that we can, people can come and stay easily. I really enjoy that my kids are getting to meet people from all over the world with different thoughts on different things, and they engage with them in different languages. And they're kind of, it's quite an enriching experience beyond what I ever expected it to be.
Yeah, and I imagine there's going to be quite a lot of people that will come and take up the opportunity to stay
Hope so,
after you've visited. I'm sure you've made quite an impact
Yeah.
And looking at your trip around New Zealand, geez, you've been to some incredible places in terms of farms and people you've visited too.
Yeah, there was. I felt very at home in New Zealand. The feeling of space and the kind of the wilderness and the fact you don't have traffic on your roads. Although I know some of you will say you do, you don't. Yeah, that feeling of space, and I very quickly got back into normality here.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was in New Zealand, I felt my feeling of the UK is that I feel claustrophobic here.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? That was my kind of overriding thing. And you've got a beautiful country full of amazing things, like no doubt about it at all. I don't think that a lot of people said, but a lot of people who know me from New Zealand who I was going to see while I was there said, "Oh, you'll really want to stay, and make sure you've got your ticket books home, otherwise you will be staying." I'm not sure I entirely got that, but only because I don't think the opportunity is probably there like it was. Actually, I think there's some really, really capable farmers in New Zealand doing really good stuff. And I know that there are people trying to develop opportunities, but it's pretty sewn up market. Those kind of stories of people going over in the 70s and 80s and really kind of, I'm not saying that there is no opportunity, because of course there is, but for someone maybe in my position, there probably isn't quite such the opportunity.
Yeah, I've definitely got one or two farmers that have come over after selling family farms in the UK and done extremely well for themselves. But yeah, it is one of those things. There's opportunity if you can make it work. What was your biggest, I guess, learning while you were here, or what surprised you while you were in New Zealand?
What surprised me? I'm not sure anything surprised me as such. There was a couple of things that I would say that that are in my mind that I'm probably concerned about, but I don't know whether it's my right to be concerned about them, if that makes sense. I'm not there to judge, but yeah, I guess I think I probably described it to you as we've been farming for so long, we've degraded so much that where we're coming from in terms of where we have to get to be what I consider ongoing sustainable farmers in terms of our soils and even what we're doing to our waterways and our woodlands and our wildlife and all of those things, we're coming from a quite different place. You guys have been farming 150, 180, 200 years. I think the distance that you're traveling towards that goal is less, but in some scenarios I felt that the blinkers were on more. If I'm honest with you, that kind of acknowledgement that the acknowledgement that change needs to happen was probably less. And from a day-to-day operational point of view, I guess that doesn't necessarily concern me. Like good farmers being profitable, supporting families, I absolutely saw that. And we have a different, governance situation that definitely plays into that. But the work that I do with my consultancy stuff around water and soils and that sort of stuff is directly linked to the fact that my kids cannot swim in the river here, and that if you drink the water you get really ill. Or I can take you to places on this farm here on the arable ground where I can visibly show you where we're missing half a meter of topsoil, and that's hard to kind of, we have, in my opinion, we absolutely have to change that. So, and I guess I then translate that. I go to another country and I translate into the fact where you've got those things. You can still swim in your rivers and you can still enjoy that stuff. But I can absolutely assure you it's very different when you can't. Really different when you. So there's that. And then I guess the other thing that blew my mind, and I keep wanting to write something about this, but I'm absolutely not a journalist and I'm not even very good at writing. Hence, I should have stayed at school. But, on the North Island, huge areas being planted for the carbon market, like single species pine all over the place. And then I drive back through the South Island, and there's acres and hectares and hectares and hectares being cleared of wilding pines and burnt in piles. Like, that really troubled me. I don't know enough about it to have an educated opinion on what on earth is going on. But just from a very basic kind of like, oh, they're planting pines over there and they're raking them up and burning them by like the hundreds of tons worth over here. It seemed a bit broken. But again, that was, yeah. So maybe that did surprise me.
I'm happy you picked up on that, because most farmers have been talking about that for a number of years now, and it just doesn't make any sense. Like, of course, we don't want wilding pines going everywhere, but you could actually manage it in a block and have that carbon offset there. But then you're planting full sheep and beef farms that have been bought by overseas investors to offset their big companies, and you're wrecking communities and ecosystems by doing so.
And that's even that blank. Never mind the burning. Our conversation has moved on quite a bit from the carbon market.
Yeah.
And, this idea of blanket planting like single species to solve one carbon problem, it really troubles me. I had some moments when I was walking in New Zealand in this like so rich, like native bush. And I felt like an amazing kind of environment, I guess. And entirely anecdotally, I have no evidence to support it, but I'm like, this must be doing the same carbon job as single species. And it's like an amazing varied habitat. And I couldn't quite see why that wasn't being more talked about. Maybe it is. Maybe I missed those conversations. But equally, and they're the kind of conversations that we're having, certainly in Europe now. The kind of biodiversity absolutely rules over carbon, because carbon to some degree is secondary to biodiversity. And we have relatively established biodiversity markets, and it just seems to be that doesn't seem to be the conversation in New Zealand.
No, it's definitely not. It's still carbon. And in terms of like native species, because they're slower growing, you get less returns than, say, a pine monoculture. So that's why people go.
Depending on your metrics, you get slower return.
Yeah, exactly. And it's
your outcomes. Yeah.
There's been push to change, to improve the metrics, because I think there has been some work done on it. But like you say, there's nothing in the biodiversity space yet that's up and running that are facilitating farmers to get paid for improving it. And I think when we do get to that stage, that's when we'll see the switch. But at the moment, it's just carbon's your way, and you can't even do soil carbon here, really, apart from one company. Yeah, there's just a lot of skeptics around the carbon markets in New Zealand as well.
And I think people should be. Should be skeptical of these markets, quite frankly, and actually who's benefiting at the end of the day.
Yeah, most of the time it's not the farmer.
For sure.
A lot of these schemes, unfortunately. I'm just going to bring it back to that comment you made before around the difference between New Zealand and like how they kind of have the blinkers on. And I feel like personally, because we've got such a great climate here and we are such a young nation, that we think we're nowhere near, like we've got this grace around what we're doing currently, that we don't think we're degrading our environments to the extent that we are. But New Zealand's actually got one of the highest erosion rates of soil in the world, just naturally from our geological mountains and everything. So if you put farming on there and bad practices, you're actually eroding that. And a lot of our rivers and water quality is heading south, and it's people are aware of it, but the blinkers are on, because it's like, well, it can't be. Our farming's fine, and we've still got heaps of topsoil. But I'm like, every time we get a big rainfall event, the rivers are brown, and yeah.
And as I say, I think it's okay. I think it's okay to think like that, but coming from a place where we don't necessarily have that, people will change their minds when they can no longer grow the crops that they want to grow. And so my kind of, I'm absolutely not saying we're better than you, 100% not saying that, because what I'm actually saying is we're coming from a worse place.
Yeah.
Because we've done a lot more of that damage. And I guess because I can see you've got an amazingly beautiful country. I guess my plea would be try and keep it that way, and actually maybe try and remove some of those blinkers, because there are loads of good people doing stuff in New Zealand that are pushing some of those boundaries and being regenerating. versus just considering that they are, and they're two different things. And yeah, I mean, driving down through the North Island, certainly my mind switched from, is any of this being regenerating, to actually, to what degree is this being degrading?
Mm-hmm.
And that's quite, if you look at it slightly differently. And also, we talked about it, but your kind of markets are driven by people selling you stuff.
Yeah.
Like, we have slightly moved on from that. Like, we do not get our consultancy from people trying to sell us stuff. Our soil tests are not done by the fur agents. In some cases they absolutely are, but people are moving away from that because they want to have the data that they want to make the informed decisions, versus just being told you have to do something by somebody selling you something. And I experienced that quite a bit in New Zealand. Yeah, the other thing I'd say is that you kind of, again, we talked about this a bit. We have a subsidy system and so the government can, to some degree, massage what they want to happen, and they can slightly change the course of what's happening in ag by how they use that. You guys don't have that, although I did see a lot of grant work as well, so I think that there is potential to that. But the thing with the grant work is it almost seemed separate to the farming. The conversation is very much around this is farming and this is environmental work, whereas I do believe that they can be one and the same if managed correctly, certainly if you're looking at soils. And we're still stuck in that scenario here. I've seen that everywhere around the world. They're very much, unless people are really kind of pioneering a different mindset around that, they're still very much considered different things.
Yeah, totally. And there's definitely a lot of siloing around, like, this is separate from that. Like, as you say, the environmental is separate from the farming, but generally what's good for the environment, I find, is actually quite good for the farming bottom line over a longer period of time. And
Sure.
That's a hard way to change when you have people selling stuff and giving you consulting at the same time, because they don't fundamentally understand that whole system. They just understand what they're selling and how that can benefit the farmer over the next 12 months.
And that's that's a cultural change as well.
Yeah.
And actually, what our vision of the USP of New Zealand is this kind of grass-finished, grass-fed, and I think, we have it all the time I see it all over the world. No matter what country you're in, nobody wants anything imported because that country grows the best of everything, and it's nonsense.
Yeah.
In the globalized food market, lots of people can grow really, really good stuff. You guys are a huge exporter, and I really feel like your environmental credentials are the thing that you potentially have over and above other countries. And I'm not sure the value that's kind of put on them. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
The want to keep them and to use them to their ultimate, versus just going down the same road as everyone else. That kind of intensive agriculture route.
Yeah, well, I guess that leads into a big conversation that we're having currently in New Zealand, is around relaxing our gene editing and GMO restrictions, so that it's going to go from, like, you can do it as long as you meet a certain boundary, which no one's been able to do so far. But now they're going to release it to some of the loosest in the world. So going from being non-GMO and gene editing to agri-tech, biotech, all these types of things, going away from a nature-based with really good environmental credentials, we're actually kind of at a crossroads now that we can actually lose the environmental credentials by actually adopting a lot of this technology.
Yeah, personally, that is absolutely not the way I would go from what I've seen. I was only there a month. I'm trying to take a fair stab at it. I know some of the kind of broader policy type scenarios, and actually how that affects in the supply chain further. I do quite a lot of work within the European supply chain. It's not where I would be going, for sure, because I do believe it's quite unique. And actually, I'd probably be going harder the other way and really trying to develop these really good environmentally sustainable systems and encouraging that. And there are people in New Zealand who are working hard to get the premiums for that. You know, if I was farming in New Zealand, that is absolutely the route I'd go down. The tech one is an interesting one. I do believe that in terms of monitoring and kind of, there are probably practices in New Zealand that I feel like could be replaced, or certainly some efficiencies with some good sort of tech development. But I don't think that that's the kind of the core of what farming businesses should be doing. The truth is that maybe I think some New Zealanders consider it their input, but I can assure you can grow grass better than pretty much anywhere else that I've been. You know, grass, clover seems to love to grow in New Zealand. Like the utilization of that is something that you're very good at, and the management of that is something you're very good at. So why not nail the kind of environmental credentials around that, which are quite nailable in a lot of scenarios, with some advances in kind of knowledge around fertilizer usage and all of those sorts of things, and you know, nail that and really sell that as the kind of, you know, the conversation coming out of, you know, being in Canada where on huge feedlots, and I'm not saying that's the road you're going down, but where they have, you know, they're using hormones and they're injecting everything with antibiotics you're like, and I've seen that in Brazil and in America, and you're so far away from that, or should be, although I was surprised to see a feedlot in New Zealand.
There's a few of them.
Yeah, you're so far away from that I think that story of that is probably what consumers would really love. And you have to consider that you're a massive exporter, you're market driven. Of course you can find efficiencies in that, but I think the beauty and the kind of quality of what you can produce is at scale is what I'd be focusing on.
Yeah, I that's basically the line I carry everywhere I go. Is like, we have such a massive opportunity here because of the environment and the way in which we farm, and there's a huge boom in the wellness and health industry, and the consumer is becoming more educated in the way in which things are being produced. Like, we should be doubling down on what we're doing currently, and finding the efficiencies and the tech that supports that, not just kind of chucking the baby out with the bathwater and saying, actually, we're going to go a completely different direction and follow what the rest of the world's doing, and play in the commodity market, essentially. And that's not going to work well for us.
No, I'd be inclined to agree with that, actually. And the other thing I would say on that is if you're gonna stick on that route, you also have to do it with integrity. I think you have to be prepared. People need to be prepared to engage with a lot of these supply chains and their ESG goals, and you know, saying that we're the best environmental farmers in the world, which I did hear on a few occasions, is very different to doing.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not trying to be preaching that, but you have to nail that down, because actually I also really believe that you probably can be. The ability to produce grass and turn grass into milk, or grass into really good quality meat, you know, you can absolutely do, but you have to keep your integrity within that, and you have to consider, I think, some of the other things that are going on globally in terms of some of those ESG goals.
Yeah. I guess that probably leads into, because you do work with quite a lot of big companies over in the UK. We hear from probably most of their farming industry or the government that all our customers overseas are screaming very loudly about methane or reducing carbon emissions through their sourcing. Is that something you are seeing in the UK as well? Is that being the focus, or is it moved away from that, like you said earlier?
What the consumers are asking for and what the supply chain are asking for tend to be quite different things. Consumers latch on to things like methane, probably, but they're very fickle, and that really what they latch onto is the price of product.
Yeah,
it seems to be more important. There are a lot of well-informed people, and actually a lot of the data coming out of the next generation, let's say, a lot of the data coming around, they're a lot more informed than people would give them credit for. And even in their terms of like fast fashion purchasing and things like that, you know, there's definitely a mindset shift on a lot of that stuff, maybe driven by a lot of social media, but it's happening. And I think that will come, you know, this clean food thing and kind of this anti-ultra processed food, which again is much more obvious here because we have a much higher population and people are fatter. I really noticed that in New Zealand. Like, you guys still appear a much healthier nation than a lot of the other places I visited. And, you know, just don't take those things for granted. But also what it doesn't give you is quite that view of what's happening elsewhere. And I had some conversations with this with people in New Zealand, that kind of power of getting out and seeing what are the you know, certainly places you're supplying, what's happening in those worlds. Back to your question, the supply chain is very, very interested in ESG. Essentially, we are seeing on-farm implementation from pretty big corporates of, we want you to do this on your land to fulfill your supply, our needs that you supply us, but we want you to do these metrics. We're seeing quite a lot of that. Sometimes getting a premium for a product, sometimes getting quite substantial payments from those companies to kind of do implementation on farm. And they're really, you know, their pressure is on them to change how they operate. I would like to say that lots of them are doing it because they believe it's a good thing to do. I'm still remain quite unconvinced about that, but that's a whole nother play in my head about the best way to tackle that. And I think about it often. But fundamentally, there is absolutely change within the industry for sure.
Yeah. And I think that leads back to that, having integrity in what we're doing here, that flows through to what that supply chain actually wants to see as well. If they can see integrity in what we're doing and we can pass that on, there is potential for those payments or those project money for projects on farm going forward.
Mm-hmm. And that's the truth is people still need to be profitable.
Yeah.
You know, people still need to make money from farming the land and producing a product. Like, I really do respect. It's just like, what other responsibility do we have while we're doing that, and how far are we looking ahead? We use a saying here that we have to farm now like the future's ancestors.
Yeah,
because I don't want to be the guy that ruined this farm for my children's children or whatever it happened to be. Like, I think we have to be a little bit conscious about that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We're not farming just for ourselves or something to be able to hand over to our kids. It's actually the generation after that and the generation after that. Are they still going to be able to produce food to the same extent because of the choices we're making today? She's a poignant wee thing to finish there on. So I wrap up my podcast with 4 quick-fire questions for my guests. The first one is, what's one thing that you would actually change about the agricultural industry?
Mindset. I think that kind of prepared to listen to alternative views, and actually more than that, sort of question what you believe to be true.
Mm-hmm. Bring that curiosity in
Sure.
to all conversations. Looking back at your younger self, what's one piece of advice you'd give?
Funny. Yeah, this is a difficult question for me, but actually it's the same as the first question, mindset.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm sure until my mid-20s, I probably wasn't the nicest of people to hang about with, but actually, God, I wish I'd have bothered to open my mind sooner than I did, is the truth of it, you know. And I think the fact that I've done that a bit later, or maybe that's just entirely sort of a natural process, but I really wish I'd have asked a lot more questions than I did, basically.
Yeah, I'll join you on that as well.
Yeah.
What's something that's exciting you at the moment?
There is change coming.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a few of us here that sort of talking of slightly moving away from the word regenerative, because for lots of reasons. But I do kind of believe that there is a sort of a new age of farming happening. It absolutely wasn't so obvious in New Zealand, I have to say.
Yeah.
But maybe that's just because of, I say, those points of where we're coming from. But I'm excited. You know, we've got tomorrow and Saturday, we're doing farm walks here of like groups of loads of random different people from all over the place that are coming to look what we're doing because it's different.
Yeah.
And some of them own like pretty sizable areas of land that could really like create change. So I think I'm excited by, I think the word would be momentum. And I feel that there's momentum.
I feel like there's slowly building momentum here in New Zealand. We're definitely not at the same stage as you guys in the UK, but you can feel it welling up and the snowball's starting to roll, which is cool. And finally, what is a force of nature to you?
Oh, I think in this context, and what I saw so there's two things. You will never beat nature. Nature will always win, in my opinion. And everything that I've seen, and from small levels of spending years trying to drill in high quality grass lays that eventually turn into whatever they were when we originally drilled them, to like really bad flooding events that ruin a farming calendar or ruin people's houses, whatever. You're not going to beat that stuff. So let's roll with it. In the context of this, and having just been in New Zealand, the force of nature to there is the kind of is what you have, and the power that holds in terms of natural environment, in terms of your sort of tourism market, and just the kind of amazing nature that you're living in, and the kind of force that provides. Coming back to my point of don't take that for granted.
I love that. So if the listeners want to connect with you and follow along on your journey in farming and where you end up with your Nuffield, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. I do use that a bit as a kind of a diary tool. So just Dan Smith on LinkedIn, you'll probably find me, because I'm connected to lots of you guys in New Zealand now, which is exciting. And we've got an Instagram, Roots In, which actually just amusingly that drove the New Zealanders crazy, because one of the pictures is me very recently shaking hands with the king after we went for an event to celebrate regenerative farming, and I introduced him to lots of our farmers up here that are doing really cool stuff. And that got much more traction in New Zealand than it ever did in the UK. But yeah, Roots In on Instagram.
Awesome. All right, I'll link those in below under the podcast. But thank you very much for coming on today, Dan, and sharing your awesome knowledge. And it's been great to chat to you again.
Sweet. Cheers.